George DiGianni Train Station Fitness Show. Mo's next to me, and Jack Britton is on the show talking about addiction today. Jack works at the ranch at Dove Tree in Lubbock, and the number is 800-218-6727. Also in the studio is Kyle, the ticket ticker guy, who had some salient commentary. I cut him off. I said, this is fantastic. It certainly relates to the show, and let's discuss this. So, Jack, give us a moment, and Kyle was listening to the show, and he wanted to chime in. So, Kyle, you said in the past that you had an addiction. You overcame that addiction, and I asked you specifically if you were in the throes of that addiction and you heard this show, would you continue to listen or would you turn it off and be in denial?
And I answered to you, it depends on at what point of that addiction. If I'm in it and I was hardcore in the midst of it, no, I would not have. But there came that point in my life when I was physically about to die and wanted to die because I couldn't take it anymore and was ready to basically drink and drug myself to death. At that point, I probably would have, but it was at that point that for me personally, I was in a house, my granny's empty house, no plumbing, no power, lost my jobs, had a bag of pills and bottles of booze, and when that was all empty and gone, I was on my knees crying, and I cried out to God and asked him for help to please save my life, and instantaneously that desire to drink was taken from me, and that's me. That's my testimony about it, and that's how I know that if you need help, for people, I had counseling in Lubbock. I went to Texas Tech and got into trouble out there and had court-appointed counseling, and that worked later on. That instilled those thoughts in me for when I was ready to accept the truth about the situation. But I had to humble myself and say, I cannot handle this on my own anymore. I had tried. And right then and there, I promise you, I don't want to drink. I've been sober for 5 years now.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Isn't it amazing, Jack, that when someone's ready to stop something or change their life and they commit, that it's not anything you have necessarily done or we have done on this show. It's just they're at a point, they're ready to commit, and they don't need any help from anyone because now they're on autopilot in a new direction. Kyle, you may have just saved someone's life, changed their mind. I'll bet between me, Mo, and Jack, we may not have done much of anything on this show, but I would say, first of all, I applaud you, so I commend you big time. Thank you. You have made a profound impact, I guarantee it, on someone who has some type of addiction. So yours was drug and alcohol, but just addiction. I also tend to think that if someone has an addiction and they're listening to the show and no one else is around, they're more apt to listen to the show than if they were to listen to it and someone else was in the car with them or next to them listening to the show, because they would be afraid of the other person being exposed, or the person thinking they have an addiction, or this is you need to pay attention to this.
And a big problem I had for years after that took me a while, I beat myself up, just like what he was saying earlier. I blame myself for my own problems, and it's not. It's not that way. It doesn't have to be that way, because once you do make that decision to change, you have to do it. You have to start putting those steps in your life, and you can't look to the past, because if you do, you'll always be looking back at what was, and you'll feel bad about the opportunities lost. It doesn't matter anymore, because once you make that decision to change, you have to just go for it, because it's passionate people. Like, I'm an intense person, just like what he's saying, and like a bunch of addicts are. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. You just have these issues. You have to confront them and deal with them in a positive way, like just what y'all are saying. You just have to make that decision, and I guarantee it will change your life, because it's just a better way to live.
So a question I have for Jack, and you can always chime in also, Kyle, is when someone overcomes an addiction, particularly a dangerous addiction, and I don't care if it's a year later or 10 or 30 years later, is that addiction still on their mind? Are they still struggling with it every single day of their life, Jack?
I think there are quote-unquote recovery programs that would suggest that one can live in freedom from that mental obsession. There are people, though, who report to me, 10 years, 20 years clean from some addiction, I still have thoughts, or I still get sort of cues to think about again, trying to control it. I'm still entertaining some ideas that maybe one day I can control it. So, yeah, I think people, there are people who have, if it's alcoholism, for instance, we see billboards, right? And so we just automatically go to that place of, oh, that party looked fun on that commercial. But I also think that there are people who greatly reduce the effect of that mental anguish. And they do so through a number of practices that are all over the board. It depends what works for somebody.
So tell me, what can someone do, a loved one who recognizes an addiction? And, they see this, they see the person's in the throes of it, whether the other person who is the addict knows it or not. So either way, what does someone do to help these people who don't want to be helped?
Yeah. What I see is, for instance, with a new client I received earlier this week, his parents just finally said, you know what, we're paying for your lawyer, we're paying a hospital bill, we are paying for counseling to which you show up and you're under the influence. We're not doing this anymore. So in other words, George, they create and hold healthy boundaries, which is so vital because without boundaries, everything gets to remain the same.
So stop enabling.
Exactly. So, and if they need to work with a professional to do that, that might be necessary. So they could go to a counselor or somebody, maybe somebody in their religious organization, maybe it's a family friend, a neighbor, and say, what can we put together for a plan for Sally or Billy to where they will not be enabled anymore? That's obviously very frightening, George, to a lot of parents. No one wants to put their kid out on the street if they're unwilling to stop using or unwilling to stop, say like the gaming is tumultuous on their lives. They've dropped out of college or whatever.
What about intervention? They have shows on this on TV. Is that dangerous at any point? Is it dangerous? Does it make somebody go into a tailspin, or is it usually a positive outcome?
I theorize that an intervention is not what causes somebody to go into a tailspin.
Okay.
I theorize that the addiction itself is strong, and when confronted, a person can exit the door and continue to use. I'm not under this idea that, that's what causes the person to keep using. That intervention caused a big problem. That's not my theory on it. However, some parents who may struggle with this idea of boundaries, they would probably say to me, no, it does cause it, and he'll go use again, or she'll go, and it'll get worse.
Kyle, if someone performed an intervention on your life,
that would have pushed me in the opposite direction.
That's what I thought.
Because you're confronting me, I've been like, no, just get out of here. That would have been embarrassing probably at first, and then I would have turned that into anger right away, and it would have had the complete opposite effect. And
so aren't there interventions, though, Jack, where people physically take you? Like, you're not walking out anywhere. We're just taking you and doing this, whether you like it or not. Don't they exist?
I think those are old school, man. Okay. I don't think you're going to find many interventionists in today's world who are going to use force at all.
I don't know. I'm just asking.
I like what Kyle was talking about with the positive. And that's the big thing I think that a lot of people, like you were just saying, George, you take this person, you don't have a choice, you've got to go, and we're going to work on this addiction. But, Kyle was like, okay, I'm going to focus on now forward. Let's think about what I can do positive.
But he was also ready to change. I'm talking about people who are in the throes of addiction who aren't ready to change. Yeah. What does a parent do? And one of the things Jack said is the parent or parents can go seek help themselves for what they may be doing to enable the issue, to set boundaries, and then what does the parent do from there? What if it's not the parent? What if the child just took this road because of who they were hanging out with? How did they begin to change this person, even if it's not a child? Okay, we're talking about significant others here, a partnership, spouses. How do you get that person to become healthy? What are the steps? What do you do?
Yeah, I think one of the main things I like to do is simply express concern and love. I don't have to embarrass them. There is no shaming. I don't show up at an inappropriate time. I might ask them to meet me for lunch. Guys, I've been to a lot of motels around Lubbock. After a client is struggling, a former client, and they need some help, and their parent says, we're 1,000 miles away. Would you mind going to check up on our kid? And I'll go there, and I just simply say, hey, I care about you. If you want to talk, we can talk.
I wish I'd had you as a counselor, because that is the opposite of the stuff that I got out there in Lubbock, really. So, I mean, that's exactly what coming from an addict, that is what I would have wanted to hear. And just somebody to actually listen to what I'm going through, and that's what he does.
You already know you're doing something that's not in your best interest and or other people around you. You don't need to be shamed even more.
Yeah, you need to try to help me, because I know what I'm doing. Exactly right.
You want somebody to come in and give you a hug and say, hey, man, I understand. It's okay. I'm here whenever you're ready.
The addict knows that they have a problem. Exactly right.
Exactly. So, you'd be surprised how many guys will then request help, right? And this is all anecdotal evidence for me, but what I do know is that the research on shame is it is so ugly to use shame as a tool. And I have plenty of people in my office who have been shamed tremendously. And I'm not saying that they haven't done some things that aren't ugly, right? If you steal grandmother's ring, people are going to be mad at you.
Right. Jack, less than a minute, 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, my final call sort of is I'd like to mention that I think parents have more power when they are kind. And I think it's the same for loved ones too. I'm not saying, it's all about hugs and rainbows and unicorns, but that can have a profound effect on somebody's understanding that people love them.
So be kind, support, don't shame, but also, just as importantly, don't enable. Jack Britton, thank you so much. The Ranch at Dove Tree in Lubbock is where you're a counselor. You've been there for a while. 800-218-6727. I thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So, Kyle, thank you for your input today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I would bet a lot of money that you really helped at least one person. So,
I hope so.
So thank you for exposing yourself, if you will, and being transparent. Mo, thanks for coming on. Give us some tips also about the eating and the exercise part. And next week we have another show lined up for you that's going to be another emotionally effective, we'll just say that, show that affects everybody who has a spouse, partner in their life. Okay?